Jane and her husband had recently moved into their new home, a secluded property near an old monastery. Behind the monastery lay a forgotten cemetery where criminals from a bygone era were buried. Her husband often returned home late, leaving Jane and their dog alone until his arrival. Their dog, fond of the outdoors and grassy areas, was always eager for a nighttime outing. At precisely 10 p.m., Jane would take him out, tie him to the post beside the door, and head back inside to finish the dishes while waiting for her husband. The dog had a predictable routine. He would explore the yard, play with the grass for about 10 minutes, and then scratch at the door when he was ready to come in. Jane would open the door, and he would trot inside, content with his evening adventure. One night, as Jane was washing the dishes as usual, she heard the familiar sound of the dog's nails tapping against the door. Without a second thought, she opened the door, returned to the kitchen, and continued with her chores. After drying the dishes, she went upstairs and lay down in bed. But a sudden realization made her sit upright. She hadn't closed the door. Uneasy, she hurried downstairs and approached the door. To her horror, she saw that their dog was still outside, sitting on the grass, staring back at her with confused eyes. He hadn't scratched the door at all. Jane's blood ran cold as she realized she had opened the door for someone, or something else. Someone who mimicked the sound of her dog's nails, luring her into unlocking the door. Panicked, she rushed outside, scooped up the dog, and locked the door behind her. She immediately called her husband, urging him to come home as quickly as possible. Then she bolted upstairs, taking the dog with her, and locked herself in the bedroom. Terrified, Jane kept her eyes fixed on the bedroom door. Her heart pounded in her chest when she heard a faint knock. The shadow of someone tall, loomed beneath the door. Without moving closer, Jane shouted, "Who are you? What do you want? Get out of our house! I'm calling the police!" In response, a chilling voice, deep and unnatural, echoed from the other side of the door. "Could you open the door for just a moment?" Every hair on Jane's body stood on end, and she felt as though her voice had been snatched away. She was frozen in terror. Just then, she heard the sound of her husband's car pulling into the driveway. Desperation gave her the strength to move. She rushed to the window and screamed, "Come up here! Someone's inside the house!" Her husband sprinted upstairs, and Jane quickly unlocked the door for him. Together, they searched the entire house, calling the police as well. But despite their thorough investigation, neither her husband nor the police found any sign of an intruder. It was as if the mysterious figure had vanished into thin air. However, Jane could never shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry the presence of that unseen visitor. She never felt at ease in the house again and was plagued by the constant dread that the stranger was still lurking in some hidden corner, silently observing her. That night, they tried to sleep, but their rest was interrupted by a strange, eerie sound. The wind seemed to carry a ghostly lullaby, echoing through the halls. As they sat up, disoriented, the soft glow of red light filled their bedroom. Jane's husband groggily turned to her, but before he could speak, they both heard it, a series of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind their bedroom door. Jane's husband whispered, "Stay here," but Jane wasn't about to be left alone. She followed him down the hallway as they carefully made their way toward the source of the noise. The sound was coming from the basement. They crept down the stairs, and when they reached the basement door, they noticed the light was already on. Cautiously, they stepped inside. In the dim light, they both froze in horror. Half buried in the dirt floor was a skeletal hand reaching out, as if clawing its way from the grave. Then, the most terrifying sound of all echoed through the basement. Their dog's bark morphed into the eerie yowl of a cat. Jane grabbed her husband's arm, her voice trembling. "We need to get out of here now." They dashed out of the house, running down the street in the dead of night. As they reached the road, a car appeared, slowing down as if to offer them a ride. Jane's husband frantically waved it down and, without hesitation, ran to the passenger side, urging her to get in. "Come on, hurry!" But Jane didn't move. Her eyes were wide with terror as she pointed to the driver's seat. "There's no one driving." Her husband turned pale as he looked inside. The car's doors creaked open, and a distorted voice beckoned them. Get in. What are you waiting for? Jane's husband grabbed her hand and pulled her back, and they bolted away from the ghostly car. Whatever had invaded their home, it wasn't done with them yet. The night air felt heavy with dread, as if the spirits from the old cemetery had awakened, and they weren't ready to rest in peace. As they ran through the dark street, the ghostly car followed them, its headlights flickering like glowing eyes in the night. Jane and her husband sprinted faster, but the car seemed to glide effortlessly, always just a few feet behind. The distorted voice continued to call out, "Get in! It's safe here." Desperate, they took a sharp turn and dashed into the forest near their home, hoping to lose the car among the trees. The night was eerily silent, except for their labored breaths and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. But as they slowed down, thinking they had finally escaped, a soft childlike giggle echoed through the woods. Jane clutched her husband's arm, her voice trembling. "Did you hear that?" Before he could answer, the giggle turned into a chorus of whispers, like 100 voices murmuring from all directions. Shadows moved between the trees, flickering in and out of sight. Then, ahead of them, a faint light appeared, a lantern swinging slowly in the distance. They cautiously approached, thinking it might be help, but as they drew closer, they saw the figure holding the lantern. It was a woman, her face pale as the moon, dressed in tattered clothes from another era. Her eyes were hollow, and her lips twisted into a chilling smile. The lantern cast long shadows across her face, giving her an otherworldly appearance. In a raspy voice, she whispered, "You cannot run from them. The spirits of the forgotten are restless. They want what was taken from them." Jane's husband stepped back, pulling Jane with him, but the woman's form dissolved into mist, leaving only the flickering lantern swinging on a tree branch. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a ghostly wind. They knew they couldn't stay in the forest any longer. They stumbled back onto the road and made a run for the nearest neighbor's house. Pounding on the door, they shouted for help until the elderly couple inside finally answered. "Please let us in! Something is chasing us," Jane pleaded. The couple hesitated, but let them in, locking the door behind them. Inside, the warm glow of the fireplace offered a brief sense of safety. They explained what had happened, but the old man just shook his head slowly. "This land has been cursed for centuries. Those who disturb the peace of the dead pay the price." Just as he finished speaking, the lights flickered, and a loud bang came from the basement of the house. The couple exchanged fearful glances. "We never go down there after dark," the old woman whispered. Suddenly, the dog started barking frantically, scratching at the basement door. Jane's husband moved to calm him, but the barking stopped abruptly, replaced by a low growl. The door creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness below. Then the sound of chains dragging across the floor echoed up the stairs, sending chills down their spines. The old man grabbed a shotgun from the closet. "Whatever's down there, it's not human. Stay back." Before he could approach the basement, a cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing the fire and plunging them into darkness. In the pitch black, they could hear footsteps, slow and heavy, ascending the stairs. A voice, deep and gravelly, whispered from the shadows, "You opened the door. Now you belong to us." Terrified, Jane fumbled for her phone, but it wouldn't turn on. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the spirits were closing in. Just as the shadowy figure reached the top of the stairs, the old man fired his shotgun. The flash of light revealed a gaunt, rotting face with empty eyes, but the shot passed right through it. The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the house. "You cannot harm what is already dead," it sneered. Realizing they had no choice but to flee, Jane and her husband bolted out the front door, running until their lungs burned. But as they turned back, they saw the shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching them with eyes that glowed like embers. They finally made it back to their house, but the atmosphere inside felt even more oppressive than before. Jane's husband hurried to lock every door and window while she clutched the dog, who was now trembling with fear. The house was silent, but the tension was unbearable. They could sense something was waiting, lurking just out of sight. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak and groan of the old house made them jump. Then, in the darkest hour before dawn, the red light returned, seeping under their bedroom door. It pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. From somewhere in the house, the eerie lullaby began again, faint and distorted. Jane whispered to her husband, "This place, it's not ours anymore. We need to leave." But just as they made that decision, the room grew icy cold. Their breath fogged up in the air, and then, without warning, the door burst open. Standing there was the same shadowy figure, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. "You can leave," it rasped, "but you'll never truly escape. I'll be with you, wherever you go." The next morning, Jane and her husband packed whatever they could carry and left the house behind, never to return. But as they drove away, Jane glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment she saw the figure standing in the window, watching them with those glowing eyes. Even after they moved far away, the nightmares persisted. Strange shadows would flicker in the corners of their new home, and they could still hear the faint sound of nails scratching at the door late at night. The spirit had followed them, bound by whatever curse had been unleashed that night. No matter how far they run, the darkness from the past clings to them, whispering its sinister lullaby. And every night, as they lock their doors, they wonder if this time the ghostly visitor will finally get inside.